And that's problematic because our education system is not producing the type of workforce that our increasingly sophisticated economy needs.
The South African government has just published its critical skills list. This list comprises of skills that are in high demand in the South African economy. Here to discuss more on this, as well as how the education system is failing young South Africans to equip them with the skills needed in the South African economy, is Gerbrandt van Heerden, Senior Analyst at the Center for Risk Analysis. Gary, what were flagged in this critical skills list, and what type of skills are needed in the South African economy?
So the type of occupations that stood out in the critical skills list included different types of engineers, ICT professionals, senior managers, architects, economists. And this clearly reflects that South Africa is in dire need of skills in the tertiary sector. And that's because the tertiary sector in our country is playing an increasingly prominent role. Now, for example, back in 2003, the financial sector comprised only 18% of South Africa's economy. But in 2020, that share has increased to around 22-23%. During that same period, primary and secondary sectors, for example, the mining and manufacturing sectors, have seen their overall contribution to the economy decline during that period. So, for example, the mining sector declined from 7% in 2003 to 5%. And the manufacturing sector declined from 20% to around 11-12%. And so what this means is that there is essentially a shift, or there has been a shift in our economy. Our economy is now more highly reliant on a tertiary sector, which requires a highly skilled workforce. And the primary and secondary sectors, such as mining and manufacturing, where you usually find employment for low to semi-skilled workers, those sectors are in decline. And that's problematic because our education system is not producing the type of workforce that our increasingly sophisticated economy needs.
I can actually see that decline where I stay. I stay in Wynberg, which used to be a manufacturing hub, and a lot of manufacturing buildings here have now closed down. And you can actually see that down the road towards Sandton there, the financial services are picking up. You're seeing a lot of people being employed in those sectors. Therefore, we need a more sophisticated individuals and highly skilled individuals in those particular fields. But this is not clearly reflective of our education standards. Our education standards fails to equip the young South Africans with the skills needed to be employed in those sophisticated industries. Would you say that is true there, Khari?
Yes, so unfortunately, our education system is failing our young graduates and the youth overall. Our university output is exceptionally low. So, for example, the completion rate of undergraduate degrees is only 17%. And yes, the matric pass rate is around 76%, but our bachelor pass rate, or people who perform well enough in matric in order to gain entrance to university, that rate is only around 36%. And that shows that the crux of the problem, or the origins of the problem, stems from our primary and secondary education institutions. It is at those levels where the problems first start. For example, quintile 1 schools, those are your poorest schools in the country. Around 30% of children who go to these quintile schools achieve a mathematics pass rate of around 0 to 19%. And only 8% of them manage to achieve a good enough maths pass rate above 60%. And unfortunately, it is mostly poor Black South African children that are going to these quintile 1 schools, mainly located in townships. And these schools are usually under-resourced, they are underfunded, and they lack the qualified staff. And so those children are, their opportunities are immediately squandered at the beginning of their school career. And this has ramifications down the line. And unfortunately, we don't see the situation improving anytime soon for our schooling system. We've essentially had the same education minister for more than 10 years, even though we've had a dismal matric pass rate, a school completion rate. So it just shows that the government isn't really serious about any reforms in our education system.
Yeah, Gerrie, so we see these dropout levels. We see a mass number of pupils in schools leaving school. We see the decline in education standards, for example, when looking at the number of people that have tertiary qualifications compared to those that have completed high schools and the ones that have dropped out of high school. So the situation is quite dire. Then this raises the question then, Gerrie, what can be done to solve this problem?
So I think we first need to acknowledge that we have a huge a proportion of the population that is either low skilled or semi-skilled. So what that means is we have to work with the workforce that we have, not the workforce that we wish we had. And that means that we need to allow for an environment in which primary and secondary industries, such as the agricultural industry, the mining sector, and the manufacturing sector, we need to allow for an environment for those sectors to prosper, because then employment in those sectors can increase and more low to semi-skilled people have an opportunity to get a job. Secondly, we also need to start at the beginning. We need to ensure that primary and secondary schools have not only have the adequate resources, but we also need to make sure that they have the staff with the correct qualifications. And lastly, many children, especially those in low-income households, are forced to go to their nearest school because they can't travel far to a better performing school, and they can't afford the fees of private schools and former Model C schools. So solution there is to use some of the money from the education budget and direct it towards a voucher system, which will give parents more financial, or which will financially empower parents rather to send their children to better performing schools. I think once we take these 3 steps, it can go a long way to combat our very high unemployment rate.
Indeed, Gerrie. We now leave this to you, the viewer. What do you think are the skills needed by the South African economy, and how should this be addressed from an education perspective? Just a reminder, the CRA will be hosting a webinar on education as well as skills shortage next week, Thursday. If you are a CRA client, you will receive a link to register for that webinar. If you're not a CRA client, please click on the link below to a 30-day free trial in which you will have access to next week's webinar. Until next time, take care.